About 4 years ago, well, 3.5 years ago now, I had the only opportunity I've had, and probably will ever have now, to go to the land of Israel. And I wasn't all that excited about it at first. I had seen a lot of people talking about how wonderful it was, do this, that, and the other thing, and I don't know. I didn't want to be I didn't want it to be the touristy thing. It was life-changing, and it was life-changing on a number of different levels. Not so much the, I walked where Jesus walked part. It was amazing to be in the first century synagogue in Migdal. Migdal, they found it while building a hotel. And so now the hotel goes to a certain point, and then it goes up in the air, and it goes over like this, and then down beneath it is the first century synagogue in Migdal. And of course, Mary Magdalene, that would have been her synagogue. And Jesus taught in the synagogues, all the synagogues in Galilee. And so we know that the stones, the mosaic on the floor, that it was from the first century. Those stones would have heard Jesus speaking. That was fairly amazing. But what struck me so much was how small it all is. It's tiny. I stood on the seashore next to Capernaum, where the boats would have come up after Jesus walked on the water. And wherever you were, you could see the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. I always figured sea, ocean, big, can't see. No, you can. Now it's very vague when you're going north-south, but east-west, very clear. I mean, it's a big lake, but it's just not all of Israel. You can drive from one end to the other in just a very short period of time. It's a small land. It really, really is. And so one of the more memorable places that I visited was the area where Elijah had his encounter with the prophets of Baal. And so you know the story. You know the story in 1 Kings chapter 18. You know what happens. I have to admit that over and over and over again, when you think about the mockery that Elijah poured upon the prophets of Baal, and one of the things that was fascinating was to see one of the high places in Israel, because we read about them all the time, the Asherim, the groves. These were places of horrific pagan worship, really vile pagan worship, sort of like some of the things around here. They're just much bigger than they were back then. And you know what happens, the fire falls, and Elijah has the prophets of Baal slain. And then you have this amazing, after chapter 18, the end of the drought, Ahab, Elijah running, so on and so forth. You have this amazing story that takes place in chapter 19. Now Ahab, put my old man glasses on here. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Now, by the way, I'm reading from my 1977 New American Standard Bible. I am switching. Jeffrey Rice, who did this one, beautiful job, if you know Jeffrey Rice and Post Tenebris Lux. He has my new Bible with him right now, and we'll be binding it. I've decided to go with the LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible, which is the New American Standard gone over by scholars at the Master's Seminary. And the reason's simple. For years and years and years, when I would read the Old Testament, like look down at verse 7. And this is how I would read it. And the angel of Yahweh came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you." Now it says Lord in all caps, but for a couple of decades, I have just made a practice to use the divine name because it's there. It's there over 6,000 times in the Old Testament. And it is simply a Jewish tradition to not pronounce the divine name. And so when I would read the Old Testament, I would not read Lord, I would read Yahweh. So like Psalm 110:1, Yahweh said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies footstool for your feet." Well, that's what the LSB reads. It inserts the name Yahweh for all the places the Tetragrammaton appears. And then there were certain texts that I would translate a little bit differently. John 1:18, Romans 9:5. And the LSB translates it the way that I translate it. So it's sort of like, why fight it? I mean, why be editing things as you're going along when here's a translation that does it just the way that... So when I use an English translation, I'll be using the LSB. Of course, mine will be bound in glorious orange goat skin. Hey, you can do the same thing. You can get hold of Jeffrey Rice too. Anyways, so I'm reading from the NASB, but I will make those changes as I go along, and I better read this before it gets too dark for me to see it anymore. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and even more, if I not make your life as the life of one of them," that is one of the prophets of Baal, "by tomorrow about this time." So he was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough now, O Yahweh, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him, and he said to him, "Arise, eat." Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of Yahweh came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of the food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then he came there to a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, torn down thine altars, and killed thy prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go forth and stand in the mountain before Yahweh." And behold, Yahweh was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before Yahweh, but Yahweh was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. It came about when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts. The sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And Yahweh said to him, "Go, return your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall come about, the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall put to death. The one who escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Now, I want you to think with me, first a little bit about what has taken place here. Now that I've been to Israel, I realize how he could run from one end of it to the other. You'd have to be in pretty good shape, and he obviously was, but still needed his rest, as you noted, the angel providing him with supernatural sustenance. But it does strike me that you could have such a massive victory as he had just had over the prophets of, we say Baal, it's Baal, but no one to know what in the world you're saying if you say Baal. Have such a major victory, and then within a very, very short period of time, be quite as depressed as Elijah was. And it says a little bit something about Jezebel, that Elijah is not afraid of Ahab. But all Jezebel has to do is send a messenger that says, I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow, and he's running. That tells you a little something about who Jezebel was and what she was all about. But think for a moment what it was like in this day. Remember, there had been a drought going on. And we struggle as modern Americans to conceive of how fragile human life really is, down to the history of mankind. Most of us, I mean, I was raised in a very poor family. I mean, now as an adult, I look back and I realize how poor we were. Didn't really realize it at the time, but we lived in a 105-year-old farmhouse that my dad patched back together again so we could rent it. And thinking back on it now, we were sort of subsistence level, but still, you turned the faucet and water came out. And I don't ever remember really going hungry. The idea of what they were going through in this time period, the difficulty and the challenge of what a drought would mean to crops and food and livestock and your children. There are still places on earth that experience these things, but we don't know much about those things unless you've lived in those places and have gotten out of those places and are now in a blessed place like this, at least for now. But these were difficult and dark times. What we learn in this text is that during this time, there were only 7,000 throughout the land of Israel that had not bowed the knee and kissed the Baal idols. Which means, of course, that there had been tremendous pressure placed upon everyone to compromise and to get with the program. What do I mean? Well, if you understand the nature of idolatry at this time, the idea in this day was that the various gods had power over particular aspects of human existence. And so there were fertility gods, and there were gods of the weather, and there were gods of, you could have fertility amongst your animals or fertility amongst your crops, and there would be gods that, the gods of war that, sort of only had authority out to the borders of your country. And so the idea was, if there were difficulties, if there was a drought, then what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to try to appease any and all deities that might be able to help. And the idea of having an exclusive God, just one God, to where you would not join with the community and seek the good of the community and seek the face of these deities, you'd be hated. You'd be looked upon as a person who was fundamentally hateful. You weren't loving your fellow citizen, your fellow Israelite. Who do you think you were? And so the vast majority of people in the land had compromised. Now, it doesn't mean that they didn't still go to the temple or go to at least a place of worship of Yahweh, but they had become compromised in joining the worship of the one true God with the worship of other gods. And the pressure would have been great to do so. It wouldn't have just been, well, our God's really cool and you're just going to be nerdy if you don't. No, in this situation, the pressure that would have been put upon you is you need to do this to save our country or save the world. Oh, that would never happen again. It's happening right now. And so, very often, idolatry and unfaithfulness to God comes with a pressure from those around you, including those around you who themselves now have become compromised and are saying, you're being too harsh. You're being too harsh. You're being too narrow. You need to broaden your perspective and be more loving, you see. And so here's Elijah. And Elijah says to God, I have been zealous for you. Yahweh, the God of hosts, the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left. Now, given it's possible that Elijah was somewhat, exaggerating, but it's clear he doesn't realize how many there were in Israel that had not compromised. He is surprised, I would imagine, that there are going to be 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal and every mouth that has not kissed him. 7,000. Notice it says, I will leave. God's in charge of this. It's not, well, Elijah, I was wondering if there was going to be anybody left either. It was all those people with their free will down there. I didn't know how that was all going to work out, but somehow, amazingly, there are still 7,000 that have not bowed the knee. I'm very, very thankful for that. Now, this was the remnant. This was those that God had reserved for himself. But notice, they're not the elite. Elijah would have known who they were if they were of the elite. These were what's called the Am Ha'aretz, the people of the land. Regular folks. And they had somehow managed to maintain fidelity and faithfulness. But it could not have been easy. Not just because of the pressure around them to compromise, but just think what it was like. You are being faithful to Yahweh, but you know it's Yahweh who's punishing your covenant people. You've been faithful, but you look around and you realize the people haven't been faithful, and you know that the hardships you're going through, the suffering, the deaths of friends, the weight loss, the loss of you've lost crops, you've lost livestock, your 401k is going down fast, and you know why it is, and you know it's just. You look around your land and you go, you remember Deuteronomy 28 and 29? Did y'all, I mentioned this on the Dividing Line a couple episodes ago. Did y'all hear about they just found what may be the most ancient Hebrew inscription that's ever been found. And it was found on Mount Nebel. And if you remember the blessings and the cursings, they were pronounced across this valley And it was right there that this thing was found, and it's a inscription of curses. And so it's directly connected to what happened there, and it uses Yahweh's name over and over again. And it's very, very ancient. It's from around the time when Israel would have come into the land, depending. They're saying about 1200 BC. I put the Exodus at 1400 BC, but that general time period. And so it's fascinating that it's there. But the righteous would know that what they were going through, that their suffering was a part of the just punishment of God upon a people, in light of the fact that his word said, if you abandon me, if you worship these other gods, these are the things that are going to happen. I'm going to shut up the heavens. I give you the rain, and therefore I can withhold it. And so we don't have any books written by the 7,000. No blog articles, tweets, Facebook articles, anything like that. But what would they have said? What would their attitude have been? Given the fact that they did not compromise, given the fact that they remained faithful, I can't imagine that they would have been filled with complaint. They remained faithful. They did not bow. They did not kiss the idol, despite all the pressure. Now, why in the world have I spent all this time talking about this situation? Well, you've probably already been drawing the parallels. At least, I hope you have. We have lived in a land that has been blessed beyond measure. Beyond measure. When you think of the advancements that have been made in just simply the quality of life, my mother told me about when she was a child. She remembered hearing the clip-clop of the horse pulling the wagon with the dairy products being delivered to the home. That's how far back they went. And my parents saw amazing things. They were born in the Depression, and they saw men walking on the moon, and they saw before they died, they saw pictures of faraway planets. Amazing things. And they themselves got to have air-conditioned homes and hot and cold running water. Well, in Phoenix, it's hot and hot running water, but in fact, first, when we moved in, we came from Pennsylvania. We didn't know. We arrived July 31st in Phoenix. That wasn't wise. And we had a brand new house we were moving into, just built. And we go to the sink, and you turn the C, and it's H. No matter how long you let the C run, it stays H. So you turn the H, and it just stays H. And we literally, I remember my dad getting on the phone. Now this was a phone, okay, you younger folks. It was on the wall, okay, and you picked this thing up and you pressed buttons, and you could only go so far before the doing, and it pulled you back. And we called the home maker, the home manufacturer, and we're like, it's messed up. What do you mean it's messed up? There's only hot water. And they said, you're not from around here, are you? No, if you want cold water, it'll come out of your refrigerator. And my dad hangs up the phone, and we just all sort of look at each other. What have we done? Where have we gone? And by the end of August, we pretty well knew we were in for it. Anyway, but we had those, eventually we had a solar water heater. That was pretty cool until a dust storm came along and blew it about 3 houses down the block. But had a lot of tremendous modern conveniences. And maybe I'm just saying this for myself, but man, I'm going to tell you something. I'm pretty spoiled. And I have a feeling there would be a whole lot of people basically saying to God, what have I done to you? I thought I'd been so faithful. Why have you taken my ease of life from me? I'm having trouble finding food. And I can only take a shower once a week. Yeah, that will wake us all up, won't it? It was a difficult time in those days. And yet they remained faithful. And they were surrounded by false religion. And those high places, those altars that Elijah makes reference to, those are places of sacrifice. You even have the prophets saying that the people of Israel got so low in their idolatry that they began to worship Moloch. And Moloch required child sacrifice as part of his worship. And you read Jeremiah, you read the prophets, and they specifically make reference to this kind of horrific behavior. We live in a day where, I don't know about the rest of you, I'm having to limit how much exposure or how early in the day I have exposure to what's going on in the world. Within the past week, the leader of this nation, or at least whoever writes the words the leader of this nation repeats without knowing what he's saying, I'll be perfectly honest with you on that level, stood before us and talked about the goodness, the moral, proper goodness of the utter overthrow of God's design in creating mankind, male and female, and said that it is a high priority of the government of this nation to seek to provide surgery as early as possible, including puberty blockers, and that this is going to be a moral good. These are powerful drugs that destroy the body. They stop mental development. They leave a person. The number of testimonies already available, if you even want to look them up, of what happens to people who go through these things, these childhood situations, surgeries, quote unquote transitioning. It is horrific. The destruction of the body and of the person. And yet our government says this is a moral good. And hence, if you repeat what Scripture says about how God has designed man and how man can have fulfillment, you are now viewed as being hateful. You are now being viewed as a person that needs to be watched. Or maybe in the not too distant future, unless God does something amongst our people, imprisoned, because that's hateful. This is not the first time this has happened, but it's certainly, in our experience, a period of time where we sit back and we look at what's happening. Now, many of you may know or may not know that really the person who could do a much better job in speaking to you on the subject of praying about abortion and about the murder of unborn children from Apologia Church is not me. It's my fellow pastor, Jeff Durbin. Jeff is the primary person behind founding End Abortion Now. And I don't know if any of you saw, but just a few weeks ago, if you want to see the fissure, the divide, the Grand Canyon that has developed in our society, I was so proud to watch Jeff testifying before the Colorado House of Representatives. He had gotten there at noon, and he began testifying at midnight. And the testimony went on until 3 o'clock in the morning. And at the very same time that they are introducing that kind of legislation to protect all people, the other side is introducing, as you know, both in Maryland and in Colorado, the exact opposite type of legislation that would literally decriminalize infanticide. And I'm not just simply saying, well, up to the point of birth. The language actually allows, literally says, there will be no investigations of a child's death during the natal period, which can go as much as weeks after live birth. So we know where this is going. This is all happening at the same time. And we see around, and those two issues, the transgender issue, the abortion issue, they are not separate issues. They are both very much flowing from the exact same culture of death. You want to be able to kill the child if it happens to be conceived. But the best way to avoid having to do that is to destroy the person's body so they can never conceive anyways. That's why the focus is upon young women. Oh yes, there are young men that are being destroyed. They'll never have children. But the focus, the amazing focus, is on the destruction of young women. These are all a part of the culture of death. These are all acts of rebellion against everything that Jesus taught was good and righteous. I have come that they might have life. And so the culture of death says we will embrace death in all of its forms. And we will promote it, and we will call it good. We will call it good. So as I said, I almost hesitate to raise the topic because I know who can address it so well. And one of the reasons I think that my dear brother can do so, I don't know if any of you saw the video that Jeff recorded about, I think about 18 months ago, 16, 18 months ago now, I think, about his adopted son, Augustine, we still have arguments about that too. Apologia, whatever. You know. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the events that led up to it. We're going to be doing something again in October, I believe. We do something called ReformCon once in a while. And the last one that we did back before, I think it was it 2020? I don't remember. Anyways, COVID has messed everything up. I can't remember what years are anymore, anything like that. At one of the last ones we had, Jeff had tried to deliver a sermon and he had hardly been able to speak. He was under such conviction. And I didn't realize at the time, I found out later that what was going on was, pretty much every day, someone from Apologia is outside of abortion mills all around Phoenix and now up in Salt Lake City and things like that. And we would stand out there and say, "We will adopt your baby." Well, a situation had arisen where we had a pregnant mom, and it looked like the child was going to be very special needs, specifically spinal bifida. Now we had a family in Apologia. It had a little girl, and I guess you'd call it a milder case because she can walk now. She has braces and stuff, but she can walk and things like that. But the ultrasounds didn't look good in this situation. And I won't go into all the details of all the amazingly supernatural things that happened. But Jeff and his wife, and Jeff's a very young grandfather. He has grandkids. So he and his wife, struggling with this situation, this mother has come to us, and Jeff's like, "I think I'm the one that needs to do this." And on any human level, you just go, you're a grandfather, really? Is this, given all the people in our church, is this really? But he really felt that he needed to do so, despite the fact that the doctors had told him, from what we're seeing, you may have to catheterize this boy for the next 18 years, every day. That's putting your money where your mouth is, in essence. And so the last ultrasound before the birth was scheduled very clearly showed the spine outside the body. And so Jeff and his wife were at the hospital, and they had the delivery in one room, and then they had the surgical suite set up next door, and the doctor's standing there. Because as soon as the baby's born, there needs to be major surgery done if the baby's going to survive. And so I get a call, and it's on one of these things where all of us elders are all together. And it's Jeff, and he says to us, "He's perfect." And we're like, "What?" He says, "He's perfect." What do you mean? There's nothing wrong with him. We were in the room, and he's born, and the nurses are like turning him over. They're checking her little thingy on her wrist, is this the right mom? Is this the right baby? And the doctors are coming in, because the doctors are waiting to do surgery next door. And they're looking at that baby every which direction. He probably saw the whole world going around. There's nothing wrong with him. They've got the ultrasounds. There's the spine outside the body. And when he's born, he's perfect. He's completely healed. Nothing wrong with him. And last night at church, we have the Lord's Supper each Sunday. And so I'm normally, Luke and I handle the supper. At our church, you come forward, and so someone needs to take the empty tray and put it over there. And so I get to see everybody. I love that. That's pretty cool. And here comes Jeff's wife, Candy. And there's Augustine. And like I say, he's about a year and a half now. He's a chunk. And he's a I think they know that his parentage, his father was like from Guatemala or something. So you can sort of see that in him. But he's just got a bright old smile, and he's like, hi, and he's perfect. I think that may be one of the reasons that Jeff can stand before legislators and say no. No, you don't know what you're talking about. You're murdering little children, and let me tell you why. Is because he put his money where his mouth was, in the sense that even to this day, I've told him, look, no matter what happens, as long as I've got 5 minutes before the service starts, I can preach if I need to, because he, for some reason, gets more sickness than he used to. When you're a grandfather and all of a sudden you're doing the baby thing all over again, I'm always like, well, just let me know. Of course, when I'm on the road, that doesn't help much, but he lived it. Now, I personally, back in the 1980s, 1989, January of 1989, I was arrested outside of Brian Finkel's abortion clinic in Phoenix. This was the same weekend in which my daughter was born. And so I had the opportunity in the lead up to that to go on local radio stations, take on pro-abortion leaders, things like that. And so I've had that opportunity, and I'm very thankful that I have. But that was long before what we are now experiencing today, where there is a stupor. It's a stupor. How else can you describe it? Has there ever been a day in the history of mankind where we have known more about the humanity of the preborn child than we do today? Never. Never. And yet, the large majority of the people in these casinos and these hotels and going by on the street don't even give a second thought to the fact that they know in the back of their minds that our nation is standing in blood. Don't even think about it. Because we don't think of ourselves as part of a people any longer. It's all just me. It's all my 401k and my retirement plan, and as long as I get out of this life in comfort, I'm good. Whatever comes after me, who cares? I mean, how many, honestly, see, I was raised differently. I don't know how my parents did it, but I was raised to believe that when I was 18 years old, I needed to take care of myself. My parents didn't have to pay for me to get an education. I knew they couldn't afford it anyways. That was up to me. So I earned my education. I never got a B in high school, got a full ride scholarship to college. But I was married at 19. She was 18. And man, I am glad I did that, by the way. We have our 40th wedding anniversary coming up in June. And we get to have a grand old time with our grandkids. And if I remain feisty enough, I might get to see my great-grandkids. That's wonderful. I think that's awesome. But the culture of death does not celebrate that. And that's what's all around us. And so, when we think about what is happening around us, when we think about the attitudes of people around us, and we ask the question, well, what can we do? And when we say, well, we pray, a lot of us would go, we've been praying for a long time. Well, something tells me that those 7,000 had been praying all through the drought as well. And yet they remained faithful. And it didn't mean that the drought was lifted for them. It's not like, there's one of the 7,000. You'll notice it's raining over that person. It's not raining over everybody else, but that one person's getting a nice little shower. No, it didn't work that way. So you have to ask yourself the question, what did their prayers do? And that really takes us back to what is prayer in the first place. And when you pray for something, we pray that God would end the scourge of abortion. Well, what does that mean? I mean, God could simply do that supernaturally in some fantastic fashion, I suppose. But on a practical level, what's the only way that this is going to end is if there is a fundamental change in the hearts of the people in this nation and every nation in the world. That's the only way that this is going to happen. And so if I'm praying for an end to abortion, then I am praying that God would use me to in some way be what brings that about. Well, here's the tough part. Here's the part that challenges me. Because I look around this world right now, and if I didn't believe that Christ is on his throne, I can understand why people are tripping out on every form of fentanyl and LSD and everything else, because this world looks like it's careening out of control, and there's a crazy guy over in Russia with 6,000 nuclear weapons that really seems upset, really angry about stuff right now. And I don't know about you, but the people running our country don't scare anybody. I'm sorry, when you've got admirals wearing dresses, they're going, don't have to worry about them anymore. So if I didn't think that there was an empty tomb, I don't know what I would be like, but I would probably be using all sorts of substances that I shouldn't be using. So as I look to the future, I look now as a grandfather. Nothing has changed me more than being a grandfather. Marriage is the first thing. Kids is the second thing. But when your kids have kids, all of a sudden, you start thinking about the Lion King. The circle of life, you know? You start seeing yourself in the whole long line of things. And so as I have been watching evil men and women very plainly plotting to enslave us all, basically, and many of them complaining that there should be no more than 3 billion people on Earth, and I'm going, there's 7.5 billion right now, so if you want to get down to 3 billion, there's only a few ways to do that. Thermonuclear war works, pandemics work, starvation really works well. And I look at all these things, and I'm not thinking about myself. Okay, I suppose in one sense you always think about yourself. I'll be honest with you, the way I've been thinking about myself is when I do get to have creature comforts, I'm more thankful now than I've ever been, because I know I may not have this for much longer. But I think about my grandkids. What can I do to sow into them an understanding of how to, once it all falls down, and I'm going to tell you something, no society, that cannot tell the difference between a man and a woman will long endure. It's going to collapse. It's going to fall in on it, and the destruction is going to be incredible. So someone's got to know how to put it back together again. There could be a deep period of darkness ahead of us. Because I cannot imagine a greater enemy of the claims of Christ than modern secularism. Think about everything Jesus stands for and means. What's its negation? It's found in secularism. Even the Caesars, even the pagan Romans thought there was a God. And yeah, they had guys dressing up like girls, but they all knew it was made up. They actually weren't insane enough to think, oh, that's really a woman. No, they knew that was a guy dressing as a woman. And so we're at a point where secularism destroys all meaning. All meaning. Meaning of language, meaning of history, art, music, beauty. It's all gone. Do you know who Yuval Noah Harari is? If you don't, you need to. Okay, let me ask it this way. Do you know who Joseph Mengele was?
Heard him on your show. Heard about him on your show.
Thank you very much. Heard about him on my show. Joseph Mengele. This is where history, if we still taught history, Joseph Mengele was the worst of the Nazi death camp doctors. He was the one doing the experiments on people. He was the one responsible for so many horrific deaths, and he escaped Germany to South America, and he died a natural death. We never got him. He got away with it. He lived to 70 some odd years of age. And Mengele is just the name should be enough to tell you this is satanic evil. There is a man named Yuval Noah Harari. He's Jewish, he's an atheist, he's a homosexual. And he is the chief science history advisor to probably the most powerful man in the world. His name is Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. And Harari has written a number of books. His last one is called Deus Homo. See, there was a day when every single person in this group would have known exactly what that meant because everyone studied Latin. Deus Homo, man as God. And his entire worldview, which is now being inculcated in the public schools right here, right now, the whole worldview is there is no God, there is no purpose. It's Dawkins, but with a sick twist. You know Richard Dawkins? Yes, blind watchmaker? I'm dating myself again. Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous atheists of when I was younger, wrote The Blind Watchmaker. And nature is just pitiless and merciless and has no purpose in it whatsoever. And you have no purpose. There is no transcendent purpose. It's all tooth and claw. If you die, you die. The universe does not care. We are just an accident on a piece of dust around a slightly smaller than normal medium star in one part of one galaxy amongst 100 billion galaxies. That's it. And if you pretend that there's something more important than that, you're just deceiving yourself. That's where Dawkins is, that's where Harari is, and that is a worldview that will allow you to do anything to anybody and feel good about doing it. as long as it promotes what you consider to be an improvement of life, which means you got more than somebody else does. And when you think of literally, this Harari is the one talking about hacking human beings, changing our genetic structure, continuing the process of evolution unnaturally. Think of every single sci-fi movie you've ever seen where everything went wrong. That's the guy. That's the guy. This is I Am Legend on steroids. Yeah. Same thing. Same thing. But it's real. Here's what I'm thinking. I wish it arrived today after I left. It's always how it works. Hopefully my wife's going to send them up, so I'll have them in Utah. But I've had a new shirt made. This is a good shirt. But I've made my own shirt. And it says, in fact, I'm not pulling the shirt up, I'm pulling the text up. I don't need the LSB, I need the Greek New Testament. Where did the Greek New Testament go? I don't need Codex Vaticanus, I need the Nestle Aland 28th edition. Why don't you put them in alphabetical order? I don't know. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And you would think that they would put the ones that I use most often up at the top. But they're not. Anyways, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And it's in Greek. And it says... is it Digar auton basiluon, I think. Digar auton basiluon. It is necessary for him to reign. For he must reign. It's talking about Christ. He must reign and do what? What must Christ do? Put every enemy under his feet. He must defeat them all. And what's the last enemy to be defeated? Death. Death. That's what Scripture says Jesus must do. I've never seen a greater enemy to Jesus than secularism. We thought that 70 years of communism, 120 million dead people was enough. You go to the local state college and university, and most of the kids and the professors are spouting the same idiocy that resulted in those 120 million dead. Yeah. Evidently, it wasn't enough. Evidently, the fall has to be greater. The collapse has to be greater. And so, you know what I'm praying for? I'm praying for the wisdom to know how to sow into those next generations. Sow into my kids and then my kids' kids, and give them what they're going to need when it all comes falling down. Because if we are made in the image of God, then the only people who are going to have any answers when it all comes falling down are the people that know the guy who wrote the owner's manual in the first place. And that's us. And that's us. So if I want to see abortion ended, then I need to see people recognizing that we are made in the image of God. I was listening, and I know I'm going long here, let me wrap up, but started preaching, so that's what happens. I'm hoping to arrange a debate for mid-June in Phoenix. That is not really wise, but it just simply, that's the only way it's going to work out as far as timing goes. On the subject of homosexuality. And I was listening to a panel discussion that took place in 2015 at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. I remember hearing it when it first happened. And as I listened to one guy I have debated, the other guy is the guy I may debate, who are gay Christians, I was struck over and over and over again by the fact that the conversation wasn't getting where it needed to go because it was completely based upon starting with man and man's feelings, man and man's emotions. And there was no fundamental recognition that we can't start with the creature, we have to recognize the creature has a creator. And because it didn't get to that level, you couldn't come up with any meaningful answers. It's always a matter of opinion. Well, that's your opinion, that's your view. And the fact is, if there's an empty tomb, then the one that came out of that tomb told us what we need to know about these subjects. And it's up to us to believe it and to put it into action. And that's the only hope that anybody has. That's the only hope for any person trapped in homosexuality, transgenderism. That's the only hope for the person who wants forgiveness in life, who's experienced abortion. That's the only hope. It's not opinion, it's reality. If that tomb is empty, that's all there is to it. Did anybody see? It's right around that same time period, 2015, 2016, I was teaching a apologetics class at Phoenix Seminary. I was on the Dr. Drew show. Did anybody see that? Good. Oh, great. One person did. I was on the Dr. Drew show. And once I was on by Skype, bad idea. Bad idea. Do not go on with live audience when you're on Skype. You can't talk over anybody. They can all talk over you. You might as well just be a picture, just frozen. You know, no good. But after I was on, frustrating experience that it was, I get a call from CNN, because it's on CNN. And they want to have me back on. And I'm like, well, I'd love to, but I would want to be in studio. Well, we can't fly you in. So my wife works for an airline. I can fly over for free. Well, we can't put you up. My ministry will put me up. Well, if you can get here and doesn't cost us anything, basically, fine, great. So I flew over and entered into the halls of Beelzebub himself, called CNN, and learned an amazing truth sitting in what's called the green room. The producer comes in. Wow, this is a... And I found out what's wrong with our society from a CNN producer. Yeah. Here's what he said. He said, we want to keep the conversation moving, he said, because our studies have told us that if any one person speaks for more than 15 seconds, the audience will tune out. How deep a truth can you enunciate in less than 15 seconds? I mean, the Sermon on the Mount was a little longer than 15 seconds. It really was. That's what they wanted. If you watched it, there was an exchange that took place. Dr. Drew had his sidekicks. And there was this guy. Now, I was on with some transgender guys. In fact, I was on with the big transgender dude who threatened Ben Shapiro like 2 weeks later. I don't know if you all saw that, but Ben Shapiro misgendered him, and this guy with a hand that's like 4 feet longer than Ben Shapiro's puts it on his shoulder and threatens in a nice, deep, masculine voice to beat him to death. And that's because the guy was a former Army helicopter pilot, okay, who now pretends to be a chick. And so I was on with the same guy. And at one point I had to correct the guy on the subject of the Trinity, but I quoted Matthew chapter 19, where Jesus said from the beginning, God made them male and female. And he's like, well, there's lots of religious texts out there. And this is what we need to be saying to our entire society. And not just me, it's everybody. And we can't just sit back and go, well, in my opinion, no. What I said to him was, well, sir, the man who spoke those words prophesied his own death, died on a cross, was buried, and rose again the third day, and ascended into heaven. And when you can do the same thing, then your opinion will be equal to his. And he sat there staring at me like, you're not supposed to talk to me like that. Well, somebody needs to. Our entire society needs to be talked to like that. That doesn't make me, I wasn't saying I'm a great person. But the gospel message is not just one opinion amongst many opinions. The empty tomb means that's the truth. The one who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He still is. He still is. And that's what we've got to be saying to the world around us. We've got to be saying to the world around us. So, I don't know if any of that makes any sense to you. I hope it makes you think about where you fit into all this. Because most of you here, you look like you're about my age, maybe a little older. But you and I'm afraid, well, we got some older geezers in the back, okay. But most everybody here is looking about the age of my daughter, okay. So we're not long for this planet, but a lot of you young folks, you better get a deep seat in the saddle, because you're not going to have the ease of life I had. You're not going to. It's going to cost you. If it's going to cost you, then stand up and make it worthwhile. My goodness, do not find yourself being persecuted for being a wimpy Christian. If you're going to be persecuted, at least tell them the truth. When they come to arrest you, you look them in the eye and you say, you need to know, Jesus said, if you offend one of the least of these, it's better if a millstone was hung around your neck and you were buried in the depths of the sea. And that's what you're doing. Let them know what they're doing. Let the Holy Spirit bring conviction. Who knows what it'll bring about? I'm not talking about being jerks. I'm not talking about being the type of people that run around insulting everybody for the fun of it. But we now live in a day where it is considered good to blaspheme everything that actually is good. And someone needs to stand up and say, no. This will not only bring God's judgment, it is God's judgment. We're already seeing it all around us. We're already seeing it all around us. So, with that, I better stop before I come up with another story to tell. I'd appreciate your prayers as I press on from here. Like I said, I'm hoping that some of the things we're going to be doing, especially recording up in Idaho, you all get to see a lot of that kind of stuff, and it'll be useful to you. But we all need wisdom at this time. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do this. I don't know how long it'll be until we can't have it open over there and I can't speak so loudly. You know what I mean? Or we'd be worried about the helicopters going overhead because I don't know. All I know is you're called to be faithful in whatever circumstance God places you. And we could see some real challenges ahead of us. You know what? The sufferings of this present brief life are not to be compared with the glories that we will experience in the presence of Christ. It's hard for us to really live that out, but we need to. We need to. Let's pray together.